They never planned on lying awake thinking about you. That's the first thing worth understanding here. Most people simply aren't built to face head-on what they'd rather push away through sheer stubbornness. Intensity had already taken hold of them, because real indifference doesn't make noise, it just quietly disappears. The person isn't simply confused, they're struggling with powerful feelings they've tried to deny. The more they attempt to suppress or rationalize their emotions, the stronger those feelings become. Their inconsistency and emotional withdrawal come from fearing the loss of control and vulnerability that genuine attachment brings, not necessarily from a lack of care. That's why their energy felt scattered and off, not because they felt too little for you, but because they were feeling way too much, and too much always forces a decision, and they simply weren't ready to make one. Here's something most people never say out loud, though. Avoidance isn't proof that desire is absent. It's actually proof that it exists. And this is where the real internal war started consuming them completely, because the conscious, rational part of their mind kept insisting, stay distant, stay logical, stay protected. But the deeper part, the part that never really negotiates with anyone, kept bringing you back, not literally calling out your name, something much more unsettling than that. And they started noticing something genuinely disturbing. You weren't fading into the background the way they hoped. You were getting sharper, more defined, more impossible to ignore or explain away. And that's exactly when denial starts losing its grip, because denial needs distance to survive, and your presence in their mind kept advancing instead, not physically, but psychologically, which is honestly so much harder to escape. And it goes even deeper than that, because once a feeling moves from something you can consciously doubt into something the subconscious has already accepted as certain, it stops asking for permission. It just demands to be recognized. And that exact moment arrived for them this particular morning. Not through some dramatic scene or loud confession, but in a way that shook them far more than any spoken admission ever could, because it wasn't declared out loud. It was simply understood internally, and understanding, once it fully lands, can't really be undone. You can fool other people. You can even fool yourself for a while, sometimes for a long while. But once the mind genuinely knows something, it doesn't let go of that knowledge, and they know now, not in some vague, partial way, but completely. Here's what makes all of this even more destabilizing, though. Accepting a feeling doesn't bring peace right away, not at first. It actually brings chaos, because now they have to face everything they'd been so violently avoiding. What this actually means, what it changes, what it demands of them, and above everything else, what they stand to lose if they keep ignoring it. Feelings like this refuse to stay neutral. They grow, they intensify, they push harder over time, and right now they're standing right at the edge of that pressure, gripping onto whatever control they have left while everything underneath them keeps shifting anyway. And here's the part they still won't say out loud to anyone, maybe not even to themselves. This was never purely about you as a person. It was about whatever it was you sparked inside them. And that spark is nowhere near finished doing its work. They genuinely believed that just accepting the feeling would quiet everything down. They were completely wrong about that, because what they admitted to themselves that morning didn't calm the storm at all. It just gave the storm a name, and once something has a name, running from it gets so much harder to pull off. But here's the truth of it. Awareness doesn't make intensity smaller. It sharpens it. It turns some vague, floating emotion into something you can no longer pretend isn't real. And that reality started pressing in on them almost immediately, because now there's no more pretending available to them. Every thought suddenly carries weight. Every memory feels loaded with meaning. Every silence feels charged with something unspoken. And this is where things get genuinely dangerous, because the mind does something strange once it can't deny reality anymore. It starts to split. One part of them leans toward you, another part tries to yank them back, and neither side is willing to give up ground. This isn't confusion. This is internal division, a real conflict between two opposing forces, the pull toward you and the defense against it, desire on one side and resistance on the other. And right now, both sides are getting stronger, because what they feel for you has stopped being simple attraction. It's become something closer to attachment trying to form, and attachment is genuinely threatening to anyone who's afraid of losing control over themselves. Most people never notice this pattern, but the stronger the emotional current runs, the fiercer the psychological defenses become in response. That's exactly why, after finally acknowledging their feelings to themselves, they didn't rush toward you. They hesitated instead. They overanalyzed things that used to feel effortless and easy, because now it all carries real weight, and once something carries weight, it starts to feel like a threat to their independence, a threat to their sense of identity, a threat to the whole self-image they've spent years carefully constructing. But here's the truth. You don't fear things you don't actually value. And this is where their contradiction becomes almost impossible to justify to themselves, because the exact same feeling pulling them closer to you is the one pushing them further away. And that contradiction is exhausting to carry around. It drains them. It follows them into moments that used to feel completely ordinary, because now everything carries some trace of you in it, not directly, but symbolically. A certain tone of voice, a pause in conversation, a specific kind of quiet. And suddenly they're pulled right back into thinking about you in ways they never consciously chose, feeling things they never gave themselves permission to feel. This is exactly where the subconscious tightens its grip, because it genuinely doesn't care about timing. It ignores logic completely. It only cares about what actually holds emotional weight. And you somehow crossed that particular threshold a while ago, which means you're no longer optional inside their inner world. But here's where it gets almost unbearable for them, because now they're forced to sit with the question they've been dodging with everything they've got. Why you specifically? Out of every person, every possibility, why does your presence unsettle them this much? And the more they search for a clean answer, the less rational the whole thing becomes, because this was never built on convenience. It wasn't rooted in circumstance or timing. It can't be shrunk down into some simple explanation. It's something deeper than that, something tied to recognition. And recognition is genuinely terrifying because it feels like fate, something they never chose but somehow can't escape either. This is where their fear sharpens even more, because if this feeling is real, it demands something from them: action, vulnerability, real exposure. And they've spent years actively avoiding all three of those things. So what do they do instead? They stall. They manufacture distance where none needs to exist. They try to slow down something that's already accelerating on the inside regardless. But here's what most people never fully understand. Distance doesn't weaken a genuine connection. It amplifies it. Because when you strip away all the distractions, absence takes them away. Only the truth is left standing. And the truth keeps getting louder, not quieter, stronger, not weaker. And they can feel it happening, in the way their thoughts keep circling back to you without warning, in the way emotions spike out of nowhere, in the way every attempt at suppression keeps failing over and over again. This is where real tension sets in, because now they're aware of what's happening, but still resisting it anyway. They sense it clearly, but keep questioning it. They recognize it fully, but keep avoiding its actual weight. And that creates a kind of psychological pressure that never really lets up. It builds, it compounds, It tightens until something eventually has to give. But here's what makes it even more suffocating for them. They're not just fighting the feeling itself anymore. They're fighting what that feeling reveals about who they actually are, because what they feel for you exposes things they've hidden even from themselves, the craving to really connect with someone, the longing to be truly seen and known, and the fear of being affected by another person at all. That last one is the most dangerous, because being affected means being vulnerable, and vulnerability means giving up control. And they are nowhere close to comfortable with that idea yet. So they swing back and forth. One moment they're leaning in emotionally, the next they're pulling back mentally. One moment they're picturing what this whole thing could actually become. The next they're convincing themselves it's too much, too complicated, too risky to pursue. And this back and forth pattern isn't random at all. It's a kind of shield, a way to experience the feeling without ever fully surrendering to it completely. But here's the truth. You cannot half experience something this significant. You can only put it off for a while. And putting things off always comes with a cost eventually. Because suppressed emotion doesn't just disappear quietly. It turns into tension instead, into restlessness, into this constant internal static they can't seem to shut off. And lately that static has been getting louder, sharper, harder and harder to ignore. This is where it becomes genuinely impossible to dismiss anymore, because now it's affecting them beyond just the emotional level. It's psychological, behavioral, even physical at this point. It shows up in their concentration, in their overall mood, in how they react to completely unrelated things that have nothing to do with you on the surface. Because somewhere underneath everything, an unresolved truth is rising to the surface, and it's demanding something from them that they're not ready to give. Not yet, anyway. But soon, very soon, they won't have much say in the matter, because pressure like this doesn't just plateau and stay stable, it escalates over time, and right now they're much closer to that breaking point than they even realize. Something is starting to crack, though not on the surface, not yet. They're still holding that together with practiced composure. But underneath, in the place where the mind stops performing for anyone, where the masks lose their shape entirely, where truth doesn't ask permission before it shows up, that's exactly where it's happening right now. And they feel it, not clearly, not comfortably, but unmistakably, because repression always comes with a cost eventually, and that cost is finally coming due for them. Here's the truth of it, though. The longer someone suppresses something real, the more violently it tends to resurface eventually. Not gently, not reasonably, but with a force that tears straight through everything standing in its path. And this is where their grip on the situation starts to fail, because what once felt manageable now feels invasive and overwhelming. What once felt far away now feels immediate and close. What once felt deniable now feels completely, undeniably real. And this is exactly where things turn dangerous, because once the subconscious can no longer stay contained, it doesn't negotiate anymore. It erupts instead. There's an old psychological idea that what we repress never actually disappears, it just returns wearing a disguise. But this isn't disguised anymore. This is direct, raw, and completely unfiltered, and it's breaking through in places they never expected, in their reactions, in their sudden irritability, in the way small, insignificant things trigger a disproportionate reaction, in the way their focus scatters the instant your name crosses their mind, because now it's not just a passing thought anymore. It's an interruption, a kind of psychological jolt, and they genuinely can't contain it the way they used to. And they're starting to understand something deeply unsettling. You're no longer just someone in their life. You've become someone living in their internal world instead. And that distinction changes absolutely everything, because external things can be avoided, dismissed, replaced with something else entirely. But internal realities follow you everywhere, into silence, into sleep, into every quiet moment they used to believe belonged entirely to themselves. And this is exactly where their resistance starts to fracture, because the question isn't, do I feel something anymore? That question already died a while back. Now the real question is, what am I actually going to do about this? And that's the question they genuinely dread, because taking action means exposure, and exposure means vulnerability, and vulnerability means giving up control. But here's the truth. Most people spend their entire lives running from exactly this. You can't manage or control something that has already fundamentally changed you, and you have changed them, not superficially, not temporarily, but fundamentally, in how they process emotion now, in how they interpret closeness with another person, in how they experience your absence day to day, because your absence has somehow gotten louder than your presence ever was. And that's the part that's genuinely wearing them down, not missing you exactly, but feeling you anyway, regardless of whether you're actually there or not. And this creates a kind of tension that just won't let go. It loops back on itself. It circles and returns because every attempt they make to move past you leads them right back to the same realization. Nothing else feels the same way. And that quiet internal comparison is slowly dismantling every defense they have left, because now everything else in their life feels hollow by comparison, less consuming, less significant somehow. And that forces them to confront a truth they've been desperately avoiding this whole time. This particular thing cannot simply be replaced with something else. This is where a quiet kind of panic starts creeping in, nothing dramatic or visible on the outside, just a slow building sense of urgency underneath everything. Because if something truly can't be replaced, then the possibility of losing it becomes very real and very tangible, and the fear of losing something genuine tends to hit far harder than the fear of never having had it at all. This is where their patterns start shifting in ways even they don't fully understand yet. They become inconsistent, unpredictable, torn constantly between impulse and restraint. Because one part of them wants to move toward you, to finally dissolve all this tension, to face the truth head-on, to quiet the internal noise for good, but another part, a louder, more deeply conditioned part, keeps insisting they hold back, protect themselves, avoid whatever feels too overwhelming to handle. And this internal tug-of-war is wearing them down completely, because neither side is winning and neither side is backing off either. This is where the pressure becomes genuinely unbearable, because it's no longer just an emotional issue anymore. It's become something closer to existential. It's forcing them to confront who they actually are underneath everything versus who they've been performing as for everyone around them, because the version of themselves that avoids you isn't the same version that actually feels all of this for you, and they can't keep both versions running indefinitely. Eventually, one has to win out. This is where things get even sharper, because they're starting to see through their own patterns clearly for the first time. They catch themselves avoiding, deflecting, distracting whenever something cuts too close to the truth. And that kind of self-awareness is deeply uncomfortable. It's exposing in a way that's hard to unsee. It strips away the illusion that they still hold any real control, because now they can see it plainly, the defense mechanisms, the excuses, the countless ways they've been quietly running from all of this. And once you actually witness your own avoidance clearly, you can't unsee it again. And that creates a pressure that forecloses any possibility of retreat, because now even avoidance itself starts to feel hollow and pointless. Even distance feels manufactured and fake. Even silence starts to feel like a kind of betrayal, both of you and of themselves. This is where the breaking point starts to solidify, because they're genuinely running out of places to psychologically hide. They can't go back to not knowing anymore. They can't return to numbness. They can't rewind to before that particular morning, because something foundational has already shifted permanently. And that shift is demanding a resolution now, not eventually, not someday down the road, but very soon, because the mind can only hold this level of internal contradiction for so long before it forces some kind of verdict. And they're standing right at that edge now, closer than they've ever been before, closer than they're even willing to admit to themselves, because one more wave of pressure, one more surge of sudden clarity, one more crack in the wall they've built, and they won't be able to hold it back any longer. This is where everything comes to a head, not gradually, not softly, but with a kind of collapse they can no longer put off. Because the mind can survive confusion, it can survive denial for a while, but it genuinely cannot withstand sustained internal contradiction forever without eventually breaking under the weight of it. And they are breaking right now, not visibly, not in ways anyone around them would notice from the outside, but internally, where the truth has finally cornered them completely. Because there's no refuge left anywhere, not in logic, not in distraction, not in distance. Every single escape route they used to rely on has completely stopped working. But here's the truth of it. The final stage of repression was never silence. It's confrontation. And confrontation is coming for them whether they're ready to consent to it or not, because the subconscious mind doesn't really ask for permission at this stage. It demands alignment instead. And right now, they're deeply misaligned with themselves because what they actually feel and what they've been doing are pulling in completely opposite directions. And that kind of opposition creates something genuinely agonizing, a psychological tension so sharp it forces a real choice eventually. And this is where it becomes irreversible, because once the mind hits this particular threshold, it doesn't retreat back from it. It doesn't settle down quietly. It doesn't quiet itself back to sleep. It decides. And that decision is forming right now inside them, not in spoken words, not through some dramatic announcement, but through a quiet, unavoidable realization they can no longer talk themselves out of. This matters, not slightly, not temporarily, but profoundly, permanently. And once something gets defined that clearly in someone's mind, it reshapes their entire way of thinking going forward, because now every excuse sounds hollow to them. Every delay feels manufactured and forced. Every attempt to dismiss the feeling starts to feel like abandoning their own truth. And that's the exact instant everything gives way for them. Because people can endure pain, they can endure fear too, but they genuinely cannot keep betraying their own deepest truth forever without something breaking eventually. Eventually they choose, and they're arriving at exactly that threshold now, where the cost of continuing to avoid you has become steeper than the cost of actually facing you head-on. And that shift, that precise turning point, changes everything, because now you're no longer the difficulty in this equation. Avoidance is. And once the mind locates the real obstacle standing in its way, it stops protecting it. It starts dismantling it instead, layer by layer, excuse by excuse, wall by wall. And they can feel that whole process unfolding inside them right now. They feel their own resistance starting to soften, not willingly, not by choice exactly, but because they genuinely can't defend it anymore. And this is where the illusion finally runs out entirely, the illusion that they could keep hold of control, the illusion that they could carry all of this quietly and never actually act on any of it, the illusion that enough time would eventually just make it disappear on its own. But time never dissolved any of it. Time simply revealed it more clearly, strengthened it, sharpened it into focus. And now there's nowhere left for it to go but outward, into the open, because internal truths that reach this kind of scale eventually demand some kind of external expression. That's simply how this final stage works. And they're right there now, standing at that exact edge where staying silent has become intolerable, where doing nothing feels heavier than taking a real risk, where the question isn't, should I do something anymore, but how much longer can I possibly keep not doing anything at all? And the honest answer is not very much longer, because something inside them has already made the decision, even if they haven't physically moved yet, even if they're still reaching for whatever scraps of control they can find. The decision has already been made somewhere beneath conscious thought. And that's really what matters here, because action always follows conviction eventually, and their conviction has completely shifted now. They no longer wonder about you in some vague, uncertain way. They no longer question what they feel for you. They no longer try to minimize any of it. They simply know now. And knowing is the real point of no return, because now every moment of silence feels wrong to them. Every second of distance feels artificial and forced. Every attempt at pretending falls apart before it even fully forms. And this is where it all converges, the pressure, the awareness, the emotion, the fear, all of it collapsing down into one single truth they can no longer avoid. They cannot keep living this way. Something has to change. And once that realization locks fully into place, action stops being just a possibility and becomes something inevitable instead. Not necessarily immediate, but absolutely unavoidable eventually, because once someone's internal world shifts this deeply, their outward life has no choice but to follow eventually. There's simply no alternative left for them at that point. And here's the part almost nobody actually tells you about this whole process. The moment someone truly owns what they feel, they don't suddenly find peace or calm. They find compulsion instead, a restless kind of drive they can't quite shake off. Because real clarity doesn't soothe anyone. It pushes people toward movement instead. And right now, they're completely consumed by that internal push, trying to contain it, trying to manage it somehow, trying to delay what already feels basically written at this point. But here's the final truth of it. You can delay taking action. You can resist expressing something for a while. You can fight against what's already living inside you if you really try. But you cannot uproot something that has already fully taken hold of you. And what they feel for you isn't fragile anymore. It's not uncertain anymore either. It's not something they can simply walk away from without losing something real inside themselves in the process. It exists now, plainly and fully. And existence doesn't just dissolve away because it happens to be inconvenient or poorly timed. So now it really is just a matter of time. Not if, not maybe, not someday, just time, because the truth has already won the battle inside them. And once truth wins internally like that, the outside world simply has to catch up eventually. And when it finally does, it won't be subtle about it. It won't be casual or easy to brush off. It won't be something you can just overlook, because suppressed truth never comes back quietly once it's ready. It arrives with real intensity, with genuine urgency, with a weight that simply can't be contained any longer. And when that moment finally breaks open, you won't need to question any of it. You won't need to analyze it or pick it apart looking for hidden meaning. You won't need to try and decode what they actually feel because it will already be completely undeniable, exactly the way it already is right now, quietly inside them. And that's the part that changes everything in the end. They didn't just come to recognize how they feel about you somewhere along the way. They came to recognize that they simply can't escape it anymore.